Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Transforming Citizen Services. My name is Terry Takai, and I'm a Senior Vice President with the Center for Digital Government. And I'm so excited to be here today as a host for this webcast. I've got a terrific lineup of speakers, and you're really going to enjoy their conversation and their wisdom and some interesting lessons learned. So thanks for joining us. And we're going to have, as I said, just a really great discussion. Now, I know that you have all been in the box, for quite a while here, but I do want to go over a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we will have a recording of the presentation, and it will be sent to you in the next 48 hours. Now, you can participate in the Q&A with us by going to the Q&A box at the bottom of the presentation panel. And I'll weave those in to our conversation as we go. At the close of the webcast, we'll encourage you to complete a brief survey. We really want to hear from you. And then also, in addition to a recording of the presentation, if you'd like a copy of the slide presentation, it's going to be in the webinar resources widget. Now, we recommend that you turn off your pop-up blockers. If you need anything at all, just hit the help button at the bottom of the screen. For those of you on Twitter, if you want to use hashtag GovTechLive to share any of your key takeaways and quotes and learnings, please feel free. All right, well, let's go to a really distinguished lineup of speakers. So first is Jeremy Gray. Jeremy is the Chief Deputy Registrar and the Recorder and County Clerk for LA County. As the Chief Deputy Registrar and the Recorder and County Clerk, he serves as the Chief of Staff and the Chief Operating Officer for the largest local government elections and public records agency in the United States. And prior to this role, Mr. Gray was the Chief Deputy Executive Officer for the LA County Board of Supervisors. He has over 27 years of public sector experience, and he served as a senior executive in 5 LA County agencies. So Jeremy, that is really quite a background, and we're so excited that you could join us. And then we have Aman Buller, who's the Assistant Register Recorder and County Clerk and the Chief Information Officer for LA County. He has over 25 years of experience in technology implementations and consulting. He's responsible for overseeing strategic planning and modernization initiatives in information technology, information security, and data management. He's a pioneer in leading edge technologies, and he's transformed the largest voting system through development of the voting solutions for all people. So again, a great kickoff to our conversation. Next, we have Dan Alt. Dan is an Assistant Town Manager and the Chief Innovation Officer for the town of Cary in North Carolina. He's been in that role since December of 2016. He serves as a key architect and strategist for the town manager Stiegel's vision of creating a more adaptive and resilient local government. Prior to working for the town of Cary, he spearheaded the City of Elgin's 311 initiative, and he co-developed the city's mobile app in-house and implemented cloud applications across 21 departments. Murtaza Massoud is a managing director, global and U.S. state and local government for Box. He's an innovative business leader with business transformation experience in public and private sector organizations. He was named to our own GovTech's top 25 doers, dreamers, and drivers. And he's an enterprising visionary who drives innovation to make a positive impact on people. In his role at Box, he's focused on helping public sector CIOs and executives realize their digital strategies using cloud content management. All right, well, let's get on with it. So we all know that driving and transforming citizen services is a huge driver at both state and local government. And all of that is fueled by content. So, what does that actually mean? Well, it actually means that there's a seamless citizen experience, that we're coping with remote work, and we have increasing security and compliance risks. So, Martaza, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of walk through these trends on the slide and kind of set the stage for our conversation.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you to this really esteemed group of government leaders for joining us today. As you mentioned, that there are emerging trends as we see government agencies come out of the pandemic and have had a moment last year to kind of do a retrospect on some of the decisions and needs that have emerged in the last two to 2.5 years. We're seeing that there's an increased realization and acceptance that business cannot go on as usual. The old normal is no longer feasible. So what that means is it's about enabling citizen services and meeting them where the citizens are at, whether it's on mobile, handheld devices, whether it's their favorite browser, on a laptop, desktop, or on a kiosk or a window in the traditional sense. Making sure that this accessibility is pervasive as well as equitable. So with those parameters in mind, business leaders and technology leaders in government sector are definitely going through a app moment. I am seeing this across my engagements in the country and globally. And we're also seeing that not only are services being developed with the citizen in mind and the citizen experience in mind, they're also being developed now with the employee experience in mind. As a former HR CIO from LA County, that's the first time I've seen, employee experience as well as employee enablement come in any kind of top 5 priority. So I was really happy to see that in some of the surveys that came out this year. So making sure that the hybrid work movement is here to stay, making sure that employees have the right tools and have an enjoyable experience, leveraging those tools to get the work done is really top of mind as well. Having said all that, what these two main trends and drivers bring to the fore is the need for a secure cloud architecture, making sure that universal access as well as ease of doing business is safeguarded with the right ransomware protection, cybersecurity threat protection, as well as compliance and risk management.
Outstanding. Well, thank you, Martaza, for helping to set the stage. All right. Well, I really want to start today with an outstanding case study of how the LA County Registrar is transforming citizen services and operations. So I'd like to start out with something that's top of mind for everyone, and that is the real challenge and complexity of the voting system. So, Jeremy, I'm going to turn to you first. Can you give us some background, really, what led to the successful rollout of your voting system, and what were some of the things that you rethought to really think about what it could look like for the future?
Thanks for that question, Terry. I think first and foremost, to set the groundwork, LA County is the largest local electorate in the nation. We have over 5.6 million registered voters. In many ways, we are larger than some states. So it was very difficult for us to identify a feasible solution that was on the market. Voting technology is a very niche market. It is not as aggressive and evolutionary as the normal technology market. So we identify that, if we were to implement a system within the scale of LA County, that we would have to go on that journey with the understanding that we would need to customize that system. So, ultimately, this was a 10-year journey for us. And I would say that the most important factor is gaining buy-in from all tiers of our government agency. And that meant elected officials, budget individuals, people that hold the purse strings, staffing within the organization, and most importantly, the public. It was important for us to tell the public, here's why we need to do this, and your government tax dollars are going to be invested in a new solution to improve the voting experience for the county. And understanding when you gain buy-in with an organization of our size, that's telling the stakeholders their role, that it's not just about agreeing to it and sitting on the sideline, but here's what we need you to do. And that is not an easy process. I think most IT executives will probably underestimate the amount of time and energy, both physical and emotional energy, that it takes to solicit buy-in from an enterprise the size of LA County.
Well, Jeremy, I'm so glad that you brought that up before the technology. First of all, the amount of time for the journey, but it's interesting that you mentioned sort of involving and letting the citizens know. How did you actually do that? Was there some communication? How did you actually get citizens comfortable with the fact that there was new technology coming in?
Definitely. I think, when you implement a public-facing solution, your communication is your civic engagement is a very, very critical piece. I think telling the public the objective and desired outcome is very important, because what that does, Terry, it validates some of the issues that they may be experiencing. And over time, they may become just used to dealing with a poor user experience. In our previous voting model, you could only go to one location on one day. So you would have these long, extensive lines where you go out and you vote. And over time, decades, you just become used to that experience. This is what it is. This is what the government provides me, and therefore I will accept it. When we evolved this voting model, it included people, process, and technology. And now individuals within LA County can go to, depending on the size of the election, a host of locations and vote anywhere they want. They have the option to vote by mail. They can vote over an 11-day period. So there are a lot of accessibility options that we implemented, including the technology, to improve the overall experience of our voting process within LA County. So again, civic engagement is definitely critical. And in a county of our size, where we have so many multilingual and other accessibility needs, it was important that we identified various modalities to reach out to the public and inform them about this journey we were going on.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to ask you and Aman, how did the two of you partner? Because again, it's the technology and the leadership to make this happen. So what role did each of you play, and what were some of the really important things about your partnership? Jeremy, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to your partner, Aman.
Yeah. So number one, I think something that I'm very passionate about, Terry, is business executives trusting their IT executives and taking a step back and giving them the room to operate, and really understanding your role when it comes to vision and strategy. And once there is an agreement on that vision and strategy and understanding, it's very, very important. I cannot stress enough for business executives to empower their IT executives and give them space to operate and bring back a holistic solution that addresses that vision and strategy. And oftentimes, Terry, in government, we struggle with role confusion. It is very, very important for us business leaders to understand that the science of technology is very complex, My previous experience, I spent 20 years to learn literally this much about the science of technology. So respecting the amount of time and expertise that it takes to manage information technology is very, very important. And as business leaders, we have to give that space to our IT executives to operate.
Jeremy, that's amazing. I think every IT person in the audience is applauding behind the scenes because I think that partnership's so important. So, Aman, how did that actually work for you? And how were you able to actually work with Jeremy, to really deliver this complex solution?
Absolutely. And frankly speaking, this was a big effort. This was humongous effort, not just for the voters of LA County, but it was huge for us as well, the actual operational people as well. So we had to come up with. It wasn't just creating the technology solution and creating new devices. We had to come up with innovative ways of how are we going to roll out these devices. And as Jeremy said, there was a huge deal of citizen engagement. We've had hundreds, literally hundreds of touch points with the citizens of LA County so that we're preparing them. We held some mock elections. We held some demo centers throughout LA County. And it wasn't really the technology that was changing, the entire voting model was changing. As Jeremy said, no more going to your neighborhood precinct. You could pretty much go anywhere in the county, go to any vote center. You're not just tied to your neighborhood. The entire voting model was changing from 1 day voting to literally 11 days of voting. And that included 2 weekends. So that the concept was you could go to a mall while you are dropping your kids off to school. You could just pretty much go to any vote centers. So I think it was the adjunct technology solutions that we came up with. For example, how do we let people know that there are lines forming in a specific vote center? So we immediately came up with a wait time solution where people on their mobile devices could actually see, hey, rather than going to this vote center, I could go to another vote center which is 5 miles down the street and has virtually no line. We had to come up with electronic poll book solutions. So no more going to a vote center with a big register of voters' names where somebody would actually check off your name. We came up with electronic poll book solution. Transparency was huge. We came up with something called an interactive sample ballot, where people would, in the comfort of their own home, go through a sample ballot, and literally a QR code was presented so that they could go to a vote center rather than spending time and reading through the contests, pros and cons, and reading about the candidates. They just swipe their QR code, and their selections are right there. So I think there was a lot of innovation and a lot of freedom given to IT to come up with these different models. And I always give an analogy that VSAP was not just one project. The other day I started counting. There were more than 25 different projects that were encompassing when we say VSAP, the umbrella, the warehouse operations, the support operation, the fact that we had to go to cloud for our call center solutions. A lot of innovations, and I think rather than doing it one by one, we just wanted to transform voting for the citizens as well as for ourselves. And the fact is, now we have about 2 years plus under our belt, and we've conducted very successful countywide elections that includes presidential election and gubernatorial election. So I think we are getting to a point where now we are evolving, and now we are adding those bells and whistles that we always wanted.
So, in thinking about that complex technology set of solutions, over 25 projects, what were some of the key technical or technology related issues that you had to think about?
As I mentioned, I think one of the biggest challenge was how is it going to transform the lives of citizens? How they view voting, and how are we going to change the voting? And traditionally, if you notice, and I think Jeremy kind of alluded that people got used to going to their neighborhood precinct. We wanted to radically change it. So from the inception, the design of the system was kept in mind with the voters' needs. Voter
Interesting.
was at the pivot of our design. We wanted to make sure that the voters are comfortable. So human-centric design was the one that we adopted, and we, with multiple iterations and multiple years, uh, we created prototypes. Accessibility, it wasn't really an afterthought. A lot of times in citizen, the technology that touches the citizens, we feel that the vendors, frankly speaking, some of the vendors, they think that accessibility is an afterthought and it is meant for that specific group or specific percentage of population. That wasn't our case. We wanted to make sure that whatever we are designing will be accessible for everyone, whether that's a multilingual touch screen, whether that's a screen with multiple options of viewing and resolution, whether the same device could be hooked onto the accessibility devices. The very common ones are sip and puff devices. And that was the cornerstone of this. We wanted to make sure that it's not an afterthought. It reminds me of a situation when during our prototyping sessions, there was from our focus group, there was a person with severe motor skills, literally never had an opportunity to cast a ballot on his own. And after our prototyping and focus group testing, he came out and he told me that this is the first time he felt empowered. He did not need anybody's help, neither his relatives or friends or the vote center workers. So that is the power. We wanted to give the power to them. That was a huge challenge. Operationalizing was a huge challenge for ourselves. Just creating 30,000 or so devices, plus about 80,000 other sorts of devices, that was huge. We had to rethink our warehouse operations. We had to rethink our power needs. We had to rethink the logistical operations. We had to rethink the support operations. Operationalizing definitely was a huge challenge. And at the end of the day, with multiple rounds of testing, prototyping, learning, evolving very quickly, I think we were, at the end of the day, we were very successful in the presidential year of 2020. In fact, that was one election where we, frankly speaking, operationally, we didn't have any challenges. And that was a huge thing. So yeah, a lot of challenges, but we overcame and we just kept learning and evolving.
Fantastic. Jeremy, I'm going to ask you kind of a judgment question in some ways, but in your 27 years, how did you feel that the voting system helped with building citizen trust in government, and in some ways, perhaps changing the perception that some folks might have had about government?
Definitely, Terry. If there's no greater challenge, it is gaining and retaining the trust of the public, especially in the area of voting and elections. I think, we all see the national news about, attacks on the election process and, lack of transparency and integrity, et cetera. So that was one of the cornerstones of our principles as we implemented this solution. I will tell you, for the most part, we have a great deal of voter adoption and trust in our process. And for those individuals that are not there yet, we have processes set up to include them in the process. We allow individuals to observe our vote by mail counting process. They are allowed within our facilities to look firsthand how we perform these processes. On election night, when Amin's team is tallying millions of ballots, members of the media and the public are allowed within our facilities to look firsthand how those things are done. Those things are very, very important to ensuring that the public has a certain level of trust for government, and that we retain that trust, and that we're able to answer questions when and if they have them. So over time, I have seen that trust improve. Given my years in the county, I think IT started out within our local government as magic or voodoo. When IT started out, when I started my career in the mid 90s, information technology was at the utility stages within the county of LA. What the pandemic did, and Murtaza touched on this, is it opened the eyes to our leadership, elected officials and senior executives, to really understand the real value of information technology, and the public as well. There was a time there that the public needed a digital vehicle in order to engage government for critical services. So that in itself, and that journey through that crisis, I think we gained a certain level of trust from the public and non-IT business executives throughout our county.
Fantastic. Well, Jeremy, that's an excellent segue from your county, the biggest in the United States, to actually Dan's organization. We're not, this is pretty new, Dan, to actually have an assistant town manager also be the chief innovation officer. Yeah. So, talk a little bit about what is that role, and what are some of your objectives in supporting the city?
Yeah, I mean, it's really an honor to work at the town of Cary. It's an incredible organization. It's a wonderful municipality, about 180,000 citizens, so much smaller than LA County, but really a wonderful place to work. And I'm honored to, be in a position to be an assistant city manager and also a chief innovation officer. And for me, I see it very much as an opportunity to have lasting impact, both in the town, but with my coworkers. So as it relates to specific objectives, there's two things at the highest level that I think of this role, both as chief innovation officer and as assistant town manager, which brings with it traditional responsibilities and non-traditional responsibilities. And I think it's an optimal time to be in this role. But really, it all comes down to building and supporting, first and foremost. And specific to that, it's about building, for me in this time period, building the infrastructure necessary to support government employees, and by extension, then our citizens in this new age. It's something we call the citizen advocate way, is what we're trying to kind of emulate with the town of Cary. So it starts about creating the conditions for continuous improvement. So one of the things I'm most proud of in this role was creating a research and development division within the town. If you look at where we're at in digital transformation, I think every sector has a certain responsibility, and certainly the branch or the part of the government that's closest to the people, I think there's really a tremendous opportunity to do research and development and to kind of understand where some of these new nexuses are going to be. So that's a key piece to at least my role within the town of Cary. More specifics of what does that mean, and what does that translate into, more or less the objectives you've asked about. It's to me about simplified access, which is not new. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, but creating our 301 center in Cary to really do something that is 10 times what previous 301s have done, and really trying to emulate what all of those other 301 centers' long-term dreams have been. We're trying to turn into reality as much as possible here. And then also 911 as well, is that other simplified access, those two hubs or entrances into the organization are critical. Beneath that, that's where the new infrastructure that then impacts each department are 20 plus silos of excellence, we call them. We're trying to poke holes in them not necessarily, we used to say blow them up, but we're really not trying to do that. It's really poke holes in them. And we believe that working with, different partners, including Box, that we can really kind of change how those groups work. And that kind of begins at that front end piece and ends also at that front end piece with 311 and 911. And ultimately that opens up new opportunities with the commercial sector, new opportunities someday with citizen science, I believe, and a lot of really exciting digital opportunities. All of that, the last kind of key objective to keep in mind that's very specific, more or less, to the public sector is remembering that we, are having to serve conflicting values. This is what is really unique about our role on the front lines and really unique about the public sector. Efficiency is what, all of us that work in government are trained on and focused on, but that isn't the only value that we have to serve. The values that we, are trying to ingrain as much as possible into that infrastructure are efficiency, so the biggest bang for your buck, equity, individual rights, and participation, which is obviously highlighted by the election process here today. But each of those values, you can't serve all of them at once, but it's important that you do serve all of them. And so we think of it in terms of like it's filling cups. You're filling one, but you maybe aren't filling another. So individual rights, for example, is in direct conflict sometimes with the greatest good or the most efficient measure, but both are very important. So in this kind of a dynamic, nature, we really feel like this is an important objective for us to be pursuing.
So let me ask you, Dan, Jeremy was talking about sort of the supportive role that he played with Mon. How does that resonate with you, both in terms of your current position, but in prior positions? Why is it so important to have that relationship that Jeremy described?
It's everything. I mean, people support people. What I just had discussed, people don't support facts or ideas. It sounds good, but then when it gets put into practice, particularly in local government, where every day there are real life, literally emergencies, but then also other just important topics that we're dealing with, by virtue that it's in the city government, it's important. And nobody gets in trouble for following the rules. So there's a very dynamic environment that if you're trying to help bring change and you're trying to, deliver new technologies and do so in a thoughtful way, it really takes the support of your peers. It takes the support with formal authority and informal authority. That's really where I think looking at it as a collective that's trying to generate, net positive value is ultimately what it's about. But to do that, you have to have people supporting people. It's in all of our DNA. It's the essence of local government. But in practice, and by design, those natural conflicts, and limited resources, make it a necessity. I mean, if it wasn't a necessity, it already would be done 10 times over. So it's really about those supporting relationships. And that's one of the big reasons why, I'm happy to be in the town of Cary and to have such, great supportive teammates and to reciprocate that every day.
Outstanding. Well, Murtaza, let me come to you. I mean, you have been in LA County government, so you've had the experience inside government, but now you have experience with seeing many other government organizations across the country. So how do you see, companies actually being able to partner and actually being able to help government drive digital government services for their citizens?
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I am actually very heartened by the shift in that from both a partnering strategy perspective as well as the level of technology enablement. I see companies, including Box, come to the table with solutions, not just technical features or platform benefits. I think that's a key shift that I'm observing. I think it started before the pandemic for sure, but it accelerated in the last 2-3 years and now is here to stay, in my opinion. So I think that makes for a more meaningful model where companies, including Box, are bringing actual outcomes, measurements to the table. And that makes CIOs' lives a bit more easier in terms of making that justification for that investment, or at least making an informed decision on what would that technology or choice enable at the end of the day. The other piece that I'm also observing is there's a lot more cross-pollination of talent between public sector and private sector, which when I started my career probably wasn't the case. You either were a private sector IT individual or a public sector IT individual. With that cross-pollination is coming an appreciation of each other's experiences. What do software and technology vendors need to be able to account for, both in terms of the total cost of ownership models or just the technology footprint, the ease of administration, the ease of implementation. Gone are days when platforms like Box providing content management would require 3 full-time employees to just administer, right? Now it should be mostly self-service on demand. That's the expectation. I think that has come through with this exchange of ideas and exchange of experiences. The other thing that I'm really, really hopeful for is the enablement of talent and skills. I think vendors like us are bringing resources, and not just how-to guides, but actual training resources and enablement resources, both for employees as well as technology experts within the public sector, so that these platforms can be sustained over the long term and don't require heavy dollar investments, time investments, year after year or every 2-3 years, as was the case when I was in seat.
Fantastic. Well, I want to open it up to the entire group with some interesting discussion questions. So as we think about, I'm sure in the LA Registrar's office, you're thinking about what comes next as you think about that digital journey. So what do you see as some of the challenges for individuals, both in terms of what you're facing, but also I'm sure it's going to be very similar to what many in our audience are facing as they're really working to engage citizens, both just overall and from a technology perspective? What are some of the challenges that organizations are going to need to overcome? So Jeremy, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm going to go to Dan.
Well, I think the biggest issue has to be IT literacy, right? Technology literacy. I mean, when we're dealing with, we support almost 11 million residents within LA County from various socioeconomic backgrounds. So to ensure that our method of delivery or service is diverse enough to reach those communities that we know need the most assistance from government is always going to be a challenge. And that means that we have to look at very innovative ways and diverse ways of reaching those communities. And what I mean by that is, for example, the traditional ways of designing our systems. We need to begin looking at methods that fit in the real estate, for example, of a smartphone, rather than a normal PC. Understanding that the market penetration of smartphones is much more significant than your normal desktop device. So there are simple things that we have to look at in order to make our services more digitally accessible to our communities. And again, as Murtaza stated in his opening remarks about post-pandemic culture, our workforce and our public, we've never had such a high level of literacy, at least that I've not seen in 27 years. So the opportunities now are pretty infinite as far as our ability to push and evolve our digital services to meet that demand. Again, there was about 6 to 9 months within 2020 that our government was not open to, our facilities were not open to individuals to come in and engage physical storefront operations. So we had to figure out innovative ways of doing that. So we had a certain level of adoption. We have to retain that adoption, and we have to push it further.
Yeah. No, fantastic. That's exactly right. It's not just about Aman and his technical capability, but it's about who's on that receiving end. So Dan, for you, what are some of the key challenges that you're facing as you're, developing your strategy, and then as you're thinking about things like getting funding, convincing folks of what to do next? What are some of the challenges that you're facing in the city of Cary?
Well, I think some of the challenges that we face are probably similar to what other organizations face. Some of the biggest ones, nationally, even globally, I think Jeremy was starting to touch on a little bit. Various divides or polarizations is obviously a threat to the success of digital transformation. So I mean, the digital divide to the urban-rural divide, all of those issues end up manifesting locally. So those are real threats that constantly, that so far haven't been paralyzing our efforts, but it's something that we definitely have our eye on, and something that we see a need that whatever it is that we're working on should hopefully be elevating as many people as possible and reducing those divides. That's the best chance. The biggest then challenge for us is I think otherwise, short and long-term views within government. I mean that both as individuals, both employees and citizens, and then the collective as a whole. It's ensuring that what we're working on has understanding what the consequences are, good and bad, more or less for the long term. No one has a crystal ball, but I think it's more of a mindset and it's a way of thinking. Day in and day out, the pressures, the rewards, the ideas, often are kind of hyper focused on whatever the noise of the day is, and that's something that's just part of how society is. So I think that's a significant challenge because the municipalities are going to be here through all the booms and busts. So we have to really kind of understand, what our impact is in the short term, the intermediate term, and the longer terms. And that's a difficult balance and a difficult needle to thread day in and day out. So those things, along with kind of the polarizations that are not just present in our communities, but they're present with all of our employees and their families and friends, et cetera. So just having that kind of awareness of the world that we're in today is really kind of a threat and a challenge, honestly.
Interesting. It does certainly sort of weaving in what you're saying with what Jeremy was saying. How do you serve the population writ large when you have these differences of opinion and sort of disparities of approach? Well, Aman, I'd like you to weigh in here, and then I'm going to go to Murtaza. So again, the questions around key challenges, really to helping to transform these citizen services.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Dan mentioned, we're living in a ever-changing world. I mean, there are so many expectations from internal and external customers that we serve. They are so much used to seeing the cutting edge technology outside, and there's this set expectation that government will do the same. And frankly speaking, I think it was mentioned that when we got hit with pandemic, we had to come up with innovative ways. Believe it or not, we actually conduct marriage ceremonies here in Register Recorder. And once the pandemic hit, the facilities were closed. We had to immediately, very quickly, literally within days, come up with a solution where we could, frankly speaking, conduct marriage ceremonies online. There is an expectation from the people, that the customer experience has to be very seamless, because they are dealing with other applications, and frankly speaking, we have to be ahead of others. Digital divide, definitely very, very important challenge, and we have to rethink how we serve our public. And when we think of our services and technologies, we had to rethink, because all these applications and services are so interconnected. It's not just about focusing on those critical key applications, it's the entire ecosystem. So we had to rethink, all of us have to rethink about business continuity, for example. How do we keep providing services if such a thing like pandemic hits? So yeah, those are definitely the key challenges. Data protection definitely is very important. That kind of aligns with the trust, Because people need to have trust, and people need to view us as trusted source. And there are so many examples that one can cite when it comes to increasing or improving the public trust in our applications.
Excellent. Or Murtaza, what are you seeing out there? And then also from your experience in LA County, I'm sure that there were challenges that you faced in growing that set of citizen services.
Definitely. Definitely echo what the group has shared so far, and building upon that, as I engage with my peers across the nation, I clearly see a need for a sustainable strategy. I think the last 3-4 years were more of a response to a need, as Aman was sharing in some of the vignettes. But how do you turn that into a sustainable ecosystem of digital services, both for citizens as well as employees? So I think I see my colleagues get more and more selective on the platforms that they would continue to invest upon. And that then raises its own set of questions that need to be addressed. How do you handle fragmentation, both in terms of user experience, but also the information, both files, data, content itself? How do you make sure that that universality is maintained across different cloud platforms? How do you ensure that the citizen experience and expectation is met consistently as they move from registrar recorder, city clerk, or in terms of regional connectivity, go to a municipal utility district and then back to the city or the county? So I think that type of a regional approach is another challenge that we need to solve for. Building on the digital divide comments that the group made, that also brings to fore equity. Especially with to Dan's point, the rural and urban divide, the key differentiator there is the type of connection. So how do you, streamline accessibility to these new digital services, keeping in mind those that may not be on the best of connectivity bandwidth? Another one I think that I'm seeing that is requiring a lot of attention and focus is creating a sustainable financial model, both at the state level and the local government level, to make sure that these gains are not one-offs and we don't get caught in the same, commercial off-the-shelf cycle that we used to be in a decade ago, where you would bring something new and by the time it goes live and gets operationalized, it's old already, right?
Yeah.
The cloud helps alleviate that, but it still requires a sustainable model. That also then brings the last challenge that I would touch on is reskilling or upskilling our workforce in the public sector. I think that's a key challenge and an ongoing one that needs our focus and attention.
No, thank you, Murtaza. Those were great points. Well, let's turn to helping the audience understand, Jeremy, when you're on a 10-year journey, you got to have a pretty concrete idea anyway, and there's a lot of zigs and zags. So Murtaza, I'm going to come back to you. What advice would you have for the audience as they get going on their transformation journey of really thinking through their future digital services and then how to get there?
I think just being clear on what the primary needs of your organization are. And obviously, any given governmental jurisdiction is going to have literally hundreds, maybe thousands of business objectives and priorities. Of those hundreds and thousands, it's very, very important to break that down and agree on the top few priorities that IT can add the most value to. And once you have that agreement across your organization, as I opened up before, getting buy-in to ensure that everyone is clear on what you're going to prioritize, that's going to be key. Because once that agreement happens, Terry, and everyone is on the same page about the objectives that are prioritized, then that's where the magic happens. And that's where the expectations and outcomes are aligned. and the transformation process then begins.
Excellent. Excellent. Aman, what would you say in terms of what advice that you would give the audience as they move towards broadening their digital services?
Absolutely, and I think Jeremy kind of touched upon some of those points. Relationships matter, internal and external. I think that's very important. Thinking outside the box. Just to cite you some examples, we rely on network connectivity to check in the voters in different locations within the LA County. So a fundamental thing that there are communities that are in urgent need of connectivity. Can we pinpoint the data and say what is the voter participation, how the voter participation has improved over time, especially when we started using, for example, satellite communications? Can we leverage the same connectivity and maybe have health services or library services in the same vicinity? And that may just kill multiple birds with one stone. So I think it's leveraging your relationships and thinking outside your boundaries, going and leverage those key facets is going to eventually drive the digital services. It just not just helps the voting, it will allow those citizens or those groups to have library services, for example. A great model that we instituted was leveraging our partnerships with private entities, especially the health providers. In fact, in 2020, Staples Center, one of the iconic spots back then, it was Staples Center. We had vote centers there in Hollywood Bowl, for example, Dodger Stadium. And we actually, the Dodger organization, actually, they had won the World Cup. They had actually the World Cup on the display. While you go there and take your pictures, you can also vote, a fundamental right. So I think those are the kind of things that we have to step away from our comfort zone and start leveraging those relationships in order for communities benefit, in order for them to get those services that they need.
That's fantastic. Dan, I'm going to go to you. As you think about your city, what's advice that you would give to others in your position as they're getting started?
Sure. I mean, the first thing is it's kind of counterintuitive. I would actually say, I don't say don't do nothing, but to start out, really don't, try and hit the ground running as hard as you can. I think that's a mistake. I think to start, listen, observe, and then plan according to your circumstance, which, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, probably 80% municipalities are the same, but ultimately there's going to be nuances to each individual circumstance. But I would listen, observe, and plan, and then start small to prove things out. And most importantly, elevate your peers, elevate your colleagues that then ultimately can help carry it forward. I don't think it takes a large number of people to put a dent in digital transformation. I think it can be a small, impactful group of people. So you have to really start small, but really those first kind of, whatever time frame you're comfortable with, not really doing anything other than planning, observing, try and double it. But that phase will pay off. It will pay off because you will learn by listening to be able to connect dots in ways that you otherwise couldn't. And I think you'll find people are willing to support you after they've been, heard to a certain degree. But it's incredibly difficult to do that because it actually, kind of contradicts the reason or maybe the purpose that you got appointed or hired into a job. It's to do something. It's to make an impact. So that's a very difficult tension, but I believe it's essential, in the public sector. And obviously along the way you are doing things. But I think that would be the number one piece of advice. And I think the proof is in, time. We've been talking about digital transformation in government for a long time. There's been progress made, but there still is a long ways to go. So regardless, you're not going to solve it in the first couple of months or weeks. So take that and learn as much as you can, listen as much as you can, and just be observant of everything that's happening.
Outstanding. Well, with that, Rataz, I want to turn to you and have you kind of bring us to our final conversation, our final comments. So maybe you could talk about where Box plays a role.
Definitely. As we've heard today from this group of amazing technology leaders and government leaders, that enabling citizen services requires a deliberate strategy and a well thought out process that involves both our workforce as well as our citizens, and keeping an eye out for that experience. So from that perspective, Box provides a single unified platform for all your content management, file management needs. And that lends itself into creating of different avenues or solutions, including day-to-day collaboration, as is the case with New York City employee retirement system, where they use Box for their day-to-day document management, collaboration, change management, as well as approvals and workflows. Additionally, you can also leverage Box with its governance suite for records management and compliance, ensuring that you have HIPAA documents, PII, PCI documents with the right retention policies on it. As Dan and Aman were highlighting, various citizen engagements and applications, Town of Cary, City of Elgin, Dan, that might sound familiar, have created citizen portals where, again, leveraging Box and our partner technologies, where citizens can go in and self-service with permit applications or other information that needs to be disseminated, interact with caseworkers, as is the case with District of Columbia Office of Attorney General, and make sure that the child support services applications are being processed on time and efficiently. And the list can go on, whether it's back office, HR operations, finance and audit applications, or engaging the citizens where they are through mobile devices. Box can provide a single unified platform while ensuring that world-class security and compliance is in place and frictionless. We are able to provide that. Able to provide that.
Murtaza, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. We're able to provide that because of our unified content management capabilities that permeate throughout the content lifecycle, from cradle to grave, as I'd like to say it. Whether you're accepting documents online from citizens or creating documents and files. In case of Virginia Department of Transportation, they're storing huge LiDAR drone footage files in Box as well, all the way to classifying it, making sure the right retention and metadata is on it, providing that interactivity through content-centric services such as e-signatures or collaboration using Box Canvas, and then making sure that you're able to monitor that usage to ensure compliance and right usage. And then archiving them or disposing them when it's time to do that. That complete 360 content management is available on the Box platform.
Outstanding. Well, I can't believe that this hour has just flown by. And I just have to say to all of you as our speakers, we just had this wonderful comment from one of our members of the audience, just actually thanking you for your support of the IT organizations. And I think, Jeremy, your outstanding explanation of why it's so important to have that relationship. So I really want to thank Murtaza and Jeremy and Aman and Dan. Thank you so much for being a part of today's conversation. And I also want to thank Box for making it possible to have this webcast discussion today. And finally, thank you to our audience for joining us. As I mentioned, the recording will be available as well as the slides. So thanks again to everyone, and we really look forward to seeing you at another government technology event. Have a great rest of your day.